Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be all about 7 different ways I've ruined a mix so that you don't have to. When I was first learning how to mix, as we all do, I made a ton of mistakes, and the purpose of this video is for me to explain those mistakes, kind of show how to avoid them so you don't have to spend as much time making mistakes as I did. Hopefully you can learn from my mistakes and save yourself some time. So if that all sounds good to you, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'm going to jump right in. Number 1, not high passing. So if you're not high passing your tracks, I don't mean the whole track, I mean the individual channels within there. So like all your pianos, pads, whatever, make sure you're rolling off unnecessary low end. And now this is important because that's going to build up over time and start to conflict with things like bass and kick. Those are the 2 things that really need that low end. And otherwise, it probably doesn't need to be down there. So I'm going to show you in this mix here some practical examples of everything as we go. Here's my 808 and my drums. So these are the things we want to occupy that low end. The first thing, you might have noticed there's 2 bass tracks here. So the 808 is just the lowest of the low. And then I printed another version that's kind of more distorted, more spread out. And I made sure to roll off the lows on this because if we had lows on the bottom, that would conflict with the 808. So this just sits right on top of the 808. So especially if you're messing with your bass like that, you're going to want to do it. Another good example is on this 16mm Dream Sequence track. This preset is just squashed and it has a ton of unnecessary low end, so I definitely had to roll that off for the mix. So by default, when you pull up this preset, it actually has a low shelf from 162 all the way down. And you can see there's this huge buildup, like 20-30 hertz. It actually increases as we go towards 20 hertz. And I'll boost that some more so you can kind of hear. You might need headphones. It's just this like thumping. And that might sound cool by itself, but in the context with bass and everything, that's gonna kind of add up. So I will put the same thing on here so you can hear it. Okay, you can probably feel that now. So if you ever have a track that's like, you keep boosting the bass and the kick and you just can't get the low end clean, or you put it in your car and it just sounds dirty and like muffled and fuzzy, it might not be an issue with the kick and the bass. It's actually an issue with all of your other tracks having frequencies down there. The second thing to watch out for that I've definitely done is over compressing. So compressing is good because it levels out dynamics of a performance. But when you get to the point where you're just squashing a sound source, like 10 to 20 dB of gain reduction, you're actually taking life out of that in a way. You're removing any sort of imperfections, and you're also just squashing the tone in general. So I'll use some guitars as an example here. You can see I'm only compressing these like less than 1 dB. But let's just put the peak reduction at like 50. Just eat it. So I compressed them down so they're compressing like 10 to 20 dB of gain reduction, and I've added the gain back so that it has the same perceived volume, and you can hear that this just doesn't sound good. It's kind of distorted. The transients are having trouble getting through. It just took some of the life out of it. If this happens on accident on like 1 or 2 tracks, it might not be as big of a deal. But if you add this up over like a 40 or 50 track mix that you're over compressing everything, it's just gonna sound terrible, and no amount of EQ or volume or reverb is gonna fix it. So make sure you're not over compressing. A good healthy amount is between 1 and 3 decibels of gain reduction. I like to compress at multiple points in the chain. So these acoustics all go to a guitar bus here that's getting compressed a little bit. Again, like around 1 dB. That just helps level out the performances between the different tracks in that bus. And then the whole mix goes to another mix bus, but that also only gets about 1 dB. So if you add up all of that, it's like a dB on the guitars, a dB on the guitar bus, and then just a little bit more on the bus compressor. So even though I'm compressing, I have 3 compressors going on, which might feel like a lot, none of them are over compressing, and so nothing feels too squashed. If for whatever reason you want to compress more than a couple dB, I would just spread it over, like put some on the channel, put some on the bus, put some on the mix bus, and then it's going to spread it out and achieve that compression in a much more balanced way. Point 3 is EQ and creating space for instruments. On your next mix, try to pay attention to which elements are really important. So maybe like your lead vocal, lead guitar, piano, whatever really needs to pop out. And what we're going to try to do is carve out some EQ space for that instrument. Think of your frequency spectrum almost as a window, and you need to have all your instruments viewable through the window. And so if 2 instruments are fighting for like 1K, for example, they're not going to be able to be heard because they're both in that space. So what you could do instead is cut one of them at 1K so you can hear this one, and then the one that you cut, boost it maybe at 2K. 2K. I don't know which side it'll be for you, but boost it somewhere else, and then you'd want to cut this first frequency at where you boosted the second one. So you're sort of cutting and boosting both of them in complementary areas, and it's going to help them cut through better. The next way I've ruined a mix very early on was not automating it at all. So if you're not familiar with automation, especially in Logic Pro, I did a video about that a week or 2 ago, so you can click up here and it'll take you there. But basically what automation is change over time. And so what that is good for is the odds of your faders. You set up your faders for like the beginning of the song, and you set up all your panning, everything. The odds of that staying okay for the whole duration of the song is pretty low, almost impossible. There's going to be something that needs to be brought up or lowered or gets in the way. I guarantee like no commercial song has what's called a static mix, where it's just the faders are set, they don't change. That's not how it works. The way you combat that is by using automation. And I didn't know about this when I first started, so I would just export my mix and, it would sound good on the one section I've set the faders for, but then after that, it's like, why is the bass too loud, or why are the vocals getting buried? It's because you need to adjust that as it goes. So I'll show the automation I did for the vocals of this section of the song.
Easy to dream about wherever you are now, and the versions of ourselves we could have been. Straight out of hell.
So right when those guitars came in halfway through, they immediately got in the way of the vocal, and I had to push the vocal up just a little bit. I also did a good bit of writing the background vocals here, depending on what the vibe was. So I'll start from there again.
Could have been, we could have been. Straight out of hell, you were heaven sent, but playing cool is staying friends, and somehow the death of innocence, all the same. It's not the same as what it could have. If it's all the same, we could have.
So especially this last line here where she hits the high note, it starts off really loud, and then the vocals after are a lot quieter. And if you leave that down, those vocals at the end would just disappear.
We absolutely could have been.
So that helps it stick out in the mix and actually exist and kind of sound professional. Otherwise, it would just be gone, basically. And automation is not limited to volume. You can pan stuff differently. I also automate like sends on delays and reverbs a lot because the song is ever changing, ever evolving, and you want your mixing and processing to mimic that and go along with it. Next way I've messed up a mix is having my master be too low or so loud that it's clipping. This is definitely something you should look out for if you're a beginner or haven't thought about it before. But when you go to export your track, hit play, see where your stereo out is. This is not limited to Logic either. Any DAW you use, you have a master output. You want to make sure it's at a good volume, not clipping, not too loud. So I'll hit play and kind of show you where mine's at. All right, so peak's at like -7. That's actually a little low for where I'd want to export it, but we definitely don't want it clipping. If you are clipping, which just means you're hitting 0 right here, it's turning yellow, turning red. When you export it, the digital converters can't handle that and they just distort. And you don't want that. That's low-hanging fruit for having a good sounding mix, is not clipping it. So a way you can avoid this, but also not have your mix be so low that you can't hear it when you go check it in your car, is to put something called a limiter. If you're not familiar with that, it basically sets a ceiling and it says no audio is going to go above this ceiling. And then usually that's accompanied with something like a gain knob or a level knob that will push the volume of your track up towards the ceiling. You don't want to limit too much because it's going to start to make your track sound flat and kind of overcompressed like I talked about earlier, but you do want to limit some. So I'll use the logic limiter for this. Usually I'll use Slate Digital or like Waves LV1. Nope, not LV1, L1. But I'll use the logic one. So just set your output level. This is where it's going to stop. Sometimes it's called threshold. Sometimes it's called level. I like to pull it down to -0.1. And that just means you have 0.1 dB of headroom. So it's definitely not going to clip. And then you can hit play. It might get louder. Just fair warning. Yeah, and then I can push up this gain. I'll try to adjust that in post, but you could see as it was happening, it was reducing the gain. So the input was pushed up to the ceiling, and then we compensated for that by the gain reduction, and now our track is nice and loud. It's not going to clip. Even if the mix isn't exactly right, it'll go a long way that it's loud enough and not clipping and anything like that. The next tip I want to talk about is not panning anything. Panning, if you're not familiar with it, is the left-right orientation of a sound. So when something's dead center, it's going to be in both ears at equal volume. And what that translates to from a hearing perspective is it like sounds like it's in your brain, like it's, it's in there. As you pan things to the left or the right, let's use left for example. As I pan it to the left, you're going to feel it move over to your left ear or hear it more on the left side. And you can go what's called hard left, that's all the way. So it's literally just in your left ear. Same thing with the right side. And this is important because if all your elements are right up the middle, number one, you're going to have a hard time hearing everything because we're all right in the middle. And unless you did a great job EQing space for everything, it's really hard to get it all heard. I'm going to use the guitars as an example. Here is with none of the panning. It's okay, it's all kind of up the middle. There's some reverb that's putting it on the sides, but here it is with the panning. Hear how that just kind of spreads everything out? So a good strategy for panning is, if you're not doing it at all, do something. Just play around with it, see what you like. I often like to get 2 takes of something called a double track or double tracking or double take, whatever, and then pan those opposite of each other. So that was my strategy for the guitars. So you can hear on these acoustics, there's one on the left and one on the right. Here's the left side, and here's the right side. So that creates a nice kind of stereo image. Another good way to do this, if you didn't have double tracks, would be to put one on the left side and try to balance it with something similar on the right side. So I'll do this a lot for more organic sounding projects that I don't want a lot of double tracks. So let's say the acoustic and the main electric. So the acoustic's going to be on one side, the electric's on the other. And that's a lot more effective in a mix than having them both right here. It kind of spreads out, and then that'll save room in the middle for, I feel like I say this all the time, but your kick, your bass, your vocal. I talk about it a lot because it's important. Here's back to the center. It's kind of creating some chaos in the middle there. There's a lot going on, but just simply by putting it over on one side, you're freeing up that middle space. Just as I mentioned earlier, having space in your EQ, you also want the same type of window strategy with your panning. Now, this final tip might sound a little counterintuitive, but you also want to reference your mix in mono. What referencing in mono means is it folds your whole mix down to just right in the middle, puts the same content in each ear. And what this is good for is making sure, as good as panning is, it's no excuse for not creating space for your tracks with EQ. If you can hear everything in mono on your track, then you're going to be able to hear it in stereo for sure. An easy way to check your track in mono is to get in Logic Pro. If you have the gain plugin, you can use that. If you're in something else, I'm sure there's like a utility, a gain plugin, something like that. So whatever you're using, just look up like how to reference in mono and you'll find it for your specific context. So here it is in stereo. Here it is in mono. So our drums are still coming through great, our bass is still coming through. We hear all the guitars really well. And go through your whole mix like this, and if there's something you can't hear that you really need to hear, then it's definitely an issue you need to address with EQ or something else to bring that element louder in the mix. And it doesn't take long to check in mono either. I usually have that plugin or something like it on my output, and then just click it, check as you go, and make sure you can hear everything. It's like a 2-minute task, and it's really going to help, especially on the translation side of your mixes. So that wraps up my video for 7 ways I've ruined a mix so you don't have to. If this was helpful and you learned something, let me know down in the comments. Also, please make sure you like and subscribe because it helps the channel to grow and helps other people find the video so they can learn from it. Thanks again for watching.